In this video, we'll learn how to scan 35mm at home with full film borders. Just a quick note before we get started, this method isn't the fastest, but it is faster than any Epson V-Series scanner. And you get the full film borders. I'm including tips and tricks I've learned along the way, so you can avoid mistakes and get amazing scans even sooner. With that said, let's dive in. Equipment you'll need: gloves, a copy stand. Don't be cheap here. Good copy stands are expensive for a reason, because they don't move. Even with extra support, this copy stand has a ton of play. Save yourself a major headache and get a quality stand. A light source. This particular light is a Gen 2 Skier copy box. A camera with a macro lens. A piece of A&R glass. This is critical for 35mm negatives. A piece of anti-reflective museum glass. Residual oil remover or ROR fluid. This will remove streaks and smudges from the glass. Thanks to Kyle McDougall for this tip.
And some residual oil remover.
Chem wipes to clean the glass. An anti-static brush. This will help keep dust off the glass and off the negatives. A rocket blower. A mirror to level your camera. A wireless remote trigger for the camera. And finally, your negatives. Start by setting up your light source. Oh, it's too bright. A quick note about lighting. Backlight is critical for quality scans. The light needs to be bright, even, and as high CRI as possible. If your scans look like this, the light source isn't bright or it's not even enough. Next, we'll need a piece of A&R or anti-Newton ring glass. What are Newton rings? Newton rings appear when there are tiny air gaps between two pieces of clear material. It's more pronounced if a convex lens, i.e. your film, is pressed up against a perfectly flat glass surface. A&R glass has a textured side that prevents the air gaps from forming between the surfaces. According to the internet and physics, a downside of using textured glass is a loss of sharpness in the scan. After scanning hundreds of shots, the only way I can tell a lack of sharpness is if I zoom into the scan at 200%, and to be honest, no scan looks good at 200%. Unless you're drum scanning. If your scanning setup is dialed in, lack of sharpness isn't going to be an issue. However, if having maximum image sharpness is critical to you, medium format film, with the exception of Kentmere and Foma, does not produce Newton rings when shooting through museum glass. Alternatively, you can save yourself a lot of time, frustration, and money just by shooting digital.
It's impossible, my dear lady. That's absurd. Unthinkable. Why?
To prep our glass for scanning, spray a chem wipe with ROR. Carefully wipe the glass. You may see some smudging if this is the first time you've used ROR on the glass, so just reapply and wipe away. Next, grab your anti-static brush and wipe both sides of the glass. Follow up with a few blasts of air from the rocket blower. Place the textured side of the glass face up over your light source. Repeat the cleaning steps for the piece of museum glass. We now need to talk about another issue: dust. Unfortunately, unless you have a clean room, there will always be some dust on your negatives, but we can do a few things to minimize it. By dusting the negative before scanning and dusting the glass between changing negatives, the amount of present dust will be reduced. This will take some time initially, but it'll significantly reduce the amount of time you'll be manually removing dust in post. Trust me, it's worth it. Even if you're using auto dust removal in post, these steps are still important. Now it's time to set up the camera. Attach it to the copy stand and turn it on. Turn it on. Grab your mirror and place it under the camera. We'll be using it to level the camera. Adjust the ISO and shutter speed so you can see the reflection of the lens on the screen. I keep the aperture set to f8 so there's a reference point to line up the camera with. Enable your camera's on-screen guides and line up the cross in the middle of the screen with the center of your aperture blades. Congratulations, your camera is now level and we are almost ready to scan. Next, we need to talk camera settings. Auto settings won't work well for scanning, so how do we know what to set the camera to? Fortunately, there's an easy way to figure this out. First, set the metering mode to center. This will tell the camera to only meter the information in the center of the sensor, where the negative is, and it'll ignore the bright light around the edges of the frame. This will give us a more accurate meter reading. Aperture. Most lenses are sharpest around f8, so set the camera to f8. ISO. ISO is super easy. Set it as low as possible for the least amount of noise. This particular camera's lowest ISO is 100. Shutter speed. How do we know what shutter speed to use? If we look at the Negative Lab Pro scanning guide, Nate recommends shooting at a +1 exposure value. I prefer +2/3 or +0.07. Adjust your camera's shutter speed until the on-screen meter reads your desired exposure value. 2 quick side notes. Number 1, a bright light source makes it possible to use a faster shutter speed. Why would we want a fast shutter speed if the camera is mounted to a copy stand? If you're using a POS copy stand like this one, a fast shutter speed reduces vibrations. It'll stop any motion blur and produce a sharper image. If you're using a quality copy stand, vibration is less of an issue. Number 2, exposure settings. If you plan on batch converting your roll, keep the exposure settings the same for the entire roll. I find that some frames on the same roll tend to be over or underexposed, so for maximum editing flexibility, I adjust exposure settings between frames if needed and color correct each frame independently rather than batch converting. Now we can frame our shot and set focus. If you want full film borders, adjust the frame to fit. I've had a change of heart this year with 35mm borders and zoom in a little bit for a larger scan. Focusing. Focusing needs to be done manually for best results, but don't worry, it's easy. If using 400 speed or higher film, it's pretty easy to just focus on the film grain. If you're like me and prefer finer grain, focusing on the grain can be a little challenging, so to get around this, I turn on focus peaking and I focus on the edge of the film. It's easier to see, and there's generally enough contrast for peaking to be visible. A quick note on focus. It only needs to be adjusted once per roll unless you bump the camera or the copy stand. After nailing focus, grab your wireless remote. I use the 5-second delay to ensure there's no vibrations when the camera takes the photo. Continue repeating this process until you finish the roll. Congratulations, you just learned how to scan a 35mm film at home with full film borders. For more scanning tips, you can check out Negative Lab Pro's Best Practices page. It'll be linked in the description below. Remember to be patient through this process. It is a pain in the butt, but it'll be worth the awesome scans you get. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.